So we'll go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, my name is Sally Stein and I'm the Director of Public Programs for Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary here in Naples, Florida. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. We have Brad Cornell, the Southwest Florida Policy Associate for Audubon of the Western Everglades and Audubon of Florida, here to talk to us about conservation campaigning in Southwest Florida. So we will get started in a minute, but first I want to go over a few things. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. You can see on the slide, you can use the chat function, which usually is at the bottom of your screen, that you can put any questions in the chat box, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the program. For those of you who have friends maybe that wanted to attend and weren't able to today, or if you want to listen to this again, a recording of this webinar will be made available online on the Corkscrew website under Lunch and Learn. So just make note of our website address over there on the right of the screen. All right, and we'll go ahead and let Brad get started.
Okay, that means I need to figure out how to share my screen, which I have practiced. Let's see if it works. How does that look?
Good.
Presentation view.
All right, good. All right, well, hello everyone. Thanks for registering and participating in this Lunch and Learn today. And I really appreciate Sally and Corkscrew Swamp inviting me to share some information about a couple of important issues. It says campaigning in Southwest Florida, which is a little broad. I'm specifically going to talk about watershed issues for Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary that a lot of us have been following, and it's actually on the front page of the Naples Daily News today. So if you haven't seen that, take a look at the article on Sean Clem and Mike Duver's research on today's Naples Daily News front page. And then I'm going to pivot from that onto Conservation Collier and a referendum that's coming up this fall that we all want to be paying attention to that is not unrelated. So with that, let's get started. If we could have everybody take a nice deep breath, a little view of Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary in the wintertime. And if you would, read some of Aldo Leopold's words at the top of your screen there. I'll give you just a minute to take a look at that. So Aldo Leopold is always good for helping keep us grounded, literally and figuratively, and sorting out what's really important about our relationship to the environment in which we live, the land on which we exist. So I'm always inspired, even though he's from a past generation, he's as relevant or more so today than ever. So water issues in Southwest Florida are kind of the point of departure for this discussion. Everything obviously about South Florida and Corkscrew Swamp in particular has to do with water. And there have been a number of really just incredible water issues that have come to the forefront that we have not been able to allow to be hidden anymore. And the incredible red tide and blue-green algae, harmful algal blooms from October 2017 to February 2019 just were horrendous and have a relationship to the watersheds for those waters that were impacted. In addition, we've seen catastrophic wildfire risks and fires, incredible storms like Irma, and droughts, and dry season water declines. So these all are interrelated issues, as you wouldn't be surprised to observe. And the ones I want to focus on are the water quality decline that causes these harmful algal blooms, among other issues, the loss of wetlands and habitat in our watersheds, like the Crew watershed, the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, and the research that Sean Clem and Mike Duver have been sharing with the wider world about loss of dry season water at Corkscrew and wider. So just to illustrate some of these, here's an agricultural ditch just choked with algae, and there's a reason for that. The wildlife deaths that were a consequence of the harmful algal blooms were what really turned people's heads. 2,000 tons of marine mammals were killed in Southwest Florida alone, just in Lee and Collier County. That's, just 2 counties. And you can see the stats there. I will say that it's notable that when the news started showing the dead dolphins and sea turtles and manatees on the beaches, that's when people started getting pretty alarmed and angry. And indeed, I would point to this issue as probably one of the big factors that got Governor Ron DeSantis elected in 2018. And one of the first things he did was make Executive Order 1912, which had to do with water quality, water resources, Everglades restoration, and and climate change, actually, and sea level rise, that were issues that had been not addressed adequately in previous years. Here's another stark illustration from last spring. This isn't actually fitting on the screen real well, but this is a copy of the front page of the Naples Daily News from May of 2020, just not that long ago, a couple of months ago, where Golden Gate Estates had wildfires that caused horrendous damage, houses and evacuations. Close to 9,000 acres burned in Golden Gate Estates, and that's a huge threat. And it's not really that different from what we have all seen out in California, in the West, Idaho, in Australia, horrendously, that killed so much wildlife back then. So this is related to water impacts. Picayune Strand, big forest, Everglades restoration project. Because it has not been fully implemented, the water is not on all that landscape yet. The landscape is way too dry, and this is the result when fires get out of control. And the other side of that coin, of course, is flooding. And anybody who's been in the area for very long knows that East Bonita Springs, among other places, downtown Naples, East Naples, Everglades City, all these places flood on a regular basis whenever we have tropical rains or just big thunderstorms. But in this case, this is Hurricane Irma flooding in East Bonita. And it's because these houses are in the Imperial River floodplain. So why is anybody surprised at that? But there's also a reason, because we don't have the storage anymore in the upper watershed. We've destroyed so many wetlands. By the way, speaking of fires, if I go back to this, Big Cypress National Preserve is not unrelated to the Corkscrew problems of low dry season water levels. They've been fighting horrendous wildfires since the mid-90s. They've spent $70 million in fighting those kind of fires, money that they really don't have. The National Park Service is not hugely funded, and they are looking at ways to try and retain more of their water. They've got canals surrounding them and ditches that overdrain that landscape as well. And there are plans to fix that. So Corkscrew Swamp, as you all know, has been suffering in the dry season since about 2000. Corkscrew is fortunate in having 60 years of water level data that Dr. Sean Clem, who is the research director for Corkscrew, has analyzed along with Mike Duver and looked at what the significance of water levels have been decade by decade. For 40 years, wet season and dry season water levels were pretty consistent and natural. We're a monsoonal kind of wet season, dry season climate and area. And so, but in the deepest wetlands, Corkscrew for 40 years would dry down maybe once every 5 years, where the water would go below ground. Since 2000, that's been going on for the last 20 years. 4 out of every 5 years, we lose all our water. Something's happening that's not right, and it's a huge impact on the whole system. And one of the clear consequences is, if you look at the 1960 to today nesting for Corkscrew's wood stork colony, which used to be the largest for this species in North America, it has declined precipitously. And that's not a good trend. And it's important to recognize that wood storks and all wading birds are indicator species for how we're doing with the greater Everglades ecosystem. It's important to track wading birds. They have been chosen, you know, great egrets and little blues and tricoloreds and wood storks in particular are indicators of the status of the watersheds and the ecosystems in South Florida. The fact that the wood storks have been declining and we have lost most of the nesting at Corkscrew has implications for all kinds of other issues. Dry season fire risk, as we were just talking about, flooding during storms because we don't have the ability to store water. Our economy is affected, both agricultural and tourism economy. Human health issues, you know, wetlands, clean water. It's a vital aspect of watershed function. And storm and drought resilience, which is part of all of those, underlies this. So we're suffering for the impacts that are also hurting the wood storks, our canary in the coal mine. And what are these factors? Obviously, for water quality, it's pollution, and fertilizer nutrients are big sources of those pollutants, phosphorus and nitrogen. Also, loss of wetlands, destruction of the watersheds is seen mainly through loss of habitat and loss of wetlands. And another way we impact those watersheds is over drainage. We're obsessed with flood protection in the wet season because it's so dramatic, it's so violent sometimes. When big storms like Irma come up, you know, everybody screams, get the water off the land, get the water out of here. But once you've shunted the water to tide, to the salt water, to the Gulf, you have no resources when everybody comes here in the dry season. And that's when the wildfires and everything ramp up. And, you know, we're using water, irrigating our crops and drinking water and irrigating grass. So another factor is increased evapotranspiration, ET, is a factor that we hadn't thought of before, but Dr. Clem and Dr. Duver have raised this as a possible one of the factors in dry season water loss. The increase in woody shrubs in Corkscrew and throughout the watershed, replacing shallow rooted marsh plants, and obviously overpumping. And then there obviously are other things that we don't even know about. Just to illustrate the wetland loss, you may have seen this in the visitor center at Corkscrew, although perhaps you haven't been there recently because it's been closed, unfortunately. But this is an old map that Jason Lauritsen actually created that shows the pre-development habitats for the area around Corkscrew Swamp. The yellow area is Corkscrew, and Lake Trafford there is to the right. The pink are shallow wetlands, and they have a particular hydrologic and biologic function for wading birds and wood storks. They allow for foraging and nest initiation for wood storks. And when you don't have those, it has a big fat impact on wood storks. This map, by the way, was created partly through Mike Duver's efforts with the South Florida Water Management District when he was a senior scientist there. This is what that area looks like in 2004. It's even worse today. So we've lost most of the shallow wetlands. We've kept a lot of the deep wetlands, but the shallow wetlands, the wet prairies in particular, but hydric pine flatwoods, places that aren't wet all year round, are largely gone from our agricultural and urban landscapes and rural landscapes. That is a big consequence. Here's another thing that's important to note. The map on the left is an interesting map. You can see that same core foraging area for wood storks. That's an 18.6 mile radius around the what should be the rookery for nesting area for wood storks at Corkscrew. All that blue looks like looks like a road map. Actually, what it is a map of all the canals, the major canals and ditches in the core foraging area in Southwest Florida. That is a lot of miles, many hundreds of miles of ditches and canals. And that's, sucking water out of the whole area during the wet season and leaving it dry during the dry season. And to the right, of course, is development. Everybody recognizes that footprint surrounded by wetlands and farms. And it's right next to Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, right next to us. And that's another lesson that we've got to pay attention to. Here's some of that woody vegetation in Corkscrew on the North Marsh. You see Carolina coastal plain willow invading. It's a native plant, but it's also very invasive. And when we mess with the hydrology, with the way water works in our wetlands, like at Corkscrew or the Cruise system, you get changes in vegetation. This is one of the negative changes that we are experiencing. And when the willow comes in, it's very difficult to burn. And now you've got, two problems. You can't burn, and you've got the willow actually with high evapotranspiration draining the water during the dry season. So what are the fixes? What can we do to stop this? Well, some of these are pretty obvious. Let's just stop polluting. We've got to enforce the rules on phosphorus and nitrogen and fertilizers and cow poop and all this other stuff that gets into the water. Let's fix also the regulations that allow wetland destruction. Supposedly we have a no net loss of wetland policy nationwide, including in the state of Florida, but it's clearly not working. And we've got to fix that. And Audubon and our colleagues are working on that, but we're not there yet. We need to protect and restore wetlands. Everglades restoration is all about trying to get back some of the historic functions and watersheds and wetlands of the greater Everglades. We've destroyed half the Everglades, and it still rains the same 50, 60 inches of rain every year. Where are we going to put all that water? Well, the best place to put them back in wetlands, and that means protect and restore the wetlands. Let's fight climate change. We need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to adapt to sea level rise and all the impacts of a destabilized climate worldwide as well as in Florida. And we've got to remember that science has got to guide our responses. Monitoring that's the first thing that gets cut. And if you don't have monitoring wells, if you're not watching the wading birds, if you don't know what's going on in the ecosystem, how do you know what to do? How do you know whether you've succeeded in your restoration efforts? And so you may have read, if you read the story on the front page of the paper today, that Corkscrew is partnering with the Big Cypress Basin to do a model, and Roger Kopp is the modeler through Water Science Associates, the consultant. And this is a big Corkscrew-centered hydrologic model that is a very refined scale. We're looking at trying to identify what are the causes to these hydrologic impacts to Corkscrew. What's causing the water to drop? And of course, the flip side of that is what would be some of those solutions? And nature is not, there's not one single bullet, there's not one single cause, but that's why we do modeling, to try and figure this out. So we're very grateful for that partnership, and we expect to see results of that modeling in the fall. So restoration is guided by science like that, modeling, and we need to see more of that as we talked about. So protect and restore the wetlands, and it works. remove the woody vegetation. Corkscrew's been going after grants to put in machines that chew up those Carolina willows and put things back. So the scene on the left with the willows gets turned into the scene on the right. Those are both corkscrew scenes. And if anybody has seen the several hundred acres of restored marshes and prairies at Corkscrew, it's very impressive and inspiring. It's expensive, it's tedious. We can only do it in the dry season. Our conservation director, Marshall Olson, is heading up that, guided by the science coming out of Sean Clem's shop. But it takes a lot of money. So we're working on that restoration. And if we're successful in that, and so far we have been, then our co-land managers like the South Florida Water Management District or Bob Sobzak out there at Big Cypress National Preserve, they want to know how to do this too, because they've got the same problems. So Watershed is the name of the game. You can't just look at one little wetland. You can't look at one issue. You've got to look at the whole system. And that's what causes problems, is when we have tweaked everything so much that it's out of balance. It's not functioning the way it's supposed to. It's not holding water. It's not cleaning water. It's not recharging the aquifer. So let's get those back. How do we get it back? Well, let's buy and restore wetlands. That would be a very simple, old-fashioned way. You know, that old investment commercial, anybody's from my generation would recognize the do it the old-fashioned way, buy it. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. And we also want to manage stormwater, and we want to work with nature. You know, this is the strategy that is most efficient. It's the cheapest. It's what works best, is putting wetlands back and maintaining them. One of the best ways to do it the old-fashioned way is Conservation Collier, to buy it and restore it. And that is one of several land acquisition programs that we have at our disposal here in Southwest Florida. There's also Florida Forever that has bought lots of Everglades, and CREW system, Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, bought land just south of Corkscrew. The USDA and Farm Bill easements are a big factor across Florida on ranches, especially in farms where we're restoring wetlands. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, if you've been reading the paper, you saw that the Senate and the House in Washington, D.C. just passed a monumental bill that's going to make the Land and Water Conservation Fund allocations of about $900 million a year permanent every year. You know, Congress has been unable to keep themselves from diverting those monies to other uses, and now that's going to become permanent as soon as the president signs that bill, and we're expecting him to do that. That's a huge factor. And also, we want to incentivize ranchers. We do not want ranchers and farmers to convert to houses and malls and roads just willy-nilly all over the map. We've got to find ways to keep them in ranching and farming. Here's an important thing. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but this is called Horsepen Strand. Over here to the left, off the map a little ways, is Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. So this is in the watershed for Corkscrew Swamp, going right through the North Golden Gate Estates. And it's really important. It leads down to the Panther Refuge, and not the Panther Refuge, but down to Picayune Strand and North Belle Mead, and to the west of the Panther Refuge. We want to restore that. It's been drained by the hundreds of miles of canals in North Golden Gate Estates. And there's an opportunity. There are still a lot of wetlands there. And so the county has identified that as a project. And Conservation Collier actually has a number of watershed restoration projects. And if you go on their website, you can see some of those. Here's another one. Here's the CREW project. This is the map of the CREW project. There's Lake Trafford. Here's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary right in the middle of all that. Flint-Penn Strand, which is the Southeast Lee County part of CREW. Here's the Camp Keys Strand going from Lake Trafford down to the Panther Refuge. Really important water flowways with huge, important sloughs and wetlands and cypress and wet prairies, all vital to a watershed function. And we've got to buy and restore all of that. Here's an interesting project. This is on the right is the big Everglades restoration project that is trying to be finished. Here's a big farming area called 6Ls or Lippman Farms. And here is South Belmead, also called Picayune Strand, with a county watershed restoration, a flowway restoration that they're using BP oil spill money called the Restore Act money to restore a flowway. And they're taking the water from the Golden Gate main canal that usually gets dumped in Naples Bay and has a big impact to salinity. And they're rediverting it to a spreader underneath I-75 to a spreader channel, swale, and putting it back into wetlands. This is huge. This is bringing wetlands back. That's the kind of stuff we really need more of. So, speaking of buying land, on November 3rd, we have a lot of things to vote on, very important things. So make sure you show up. Wherever you vote, don't forget. You got to be there, whether you're mailing it in or whether you're showing up at the polling place. You know, this is not one to sit out. But for Collier County residents, there's going to be a referendum on Conservation Collier. You may remember, those of you who've been here for a little longer, that in 2002, we had a referendum on Conservation Collier the first time, and it passed. That's the first time we have passed a voter approval to tax ourselves to buy conservation land. And indeed, we had 10 years of that, all the way up to 2013. Conservation Collier bought lots of land for conservation purposes. Land like what you see at the bottom there, Pepper Ranch out there by Immokalee with these beautiful sunflowers that bloom in October. We have them in Corkscrew too, in the backcountry. Anybody who's taken those backcountry tours, if you've been privileged enough to see the sunflowers blooming there, it's an amazing sight. And so Conservation Collier has been doing it the old-fashioned way with voter support. Well, that ran out in 2013. So we've had 7 years of basically not buying very much at all and managing what we have bought. But it's time to buy more. And Audubon is working on this, and let's learn a little bit more about that. So here's a little bit about Conservation Collier itself. In the 10 years that it was using ad valorem taxes at $0.25 mil, which is $25 per $100,000 of property value, they bought 4,200 acres of conservation land on 20 preserves. 12 of them are open to the public, and they're going to have more, like the Railhead Scrub will eventually be open once those facilities are built. They're urban and rural. They're in every voter district all across the county. Immokalee, Marco Island. Very first one was Otter Mound on Marco Island. And it serves all kinds of vital purposes that you can see there. Quality of life, wildlife, nature, recreation, and a big one for us at Corkscrew is water resources. Now, it's also important, speaking of recreation, I don't know about you, but I'm doing this talk here in my dining room. And behind me is a nice picture of Corkscrew Swamp from the early 90s that Clyde Butcher took, just to show off that scene before the new boardwalk was open. That's the old boardwalk going through the wet prairie. But I'm going crazy, and I need some more time outside. You know, I'm tired of this kitchen table. So my wife and I took a walk on the Gordon River Greenway. And here's a couple of pictures from that walk. And you see the sign about COVID and, you know, walking safely. But the important point here is that the Conservation Collier preserves were open and have been open all through this pandemic. And it has been a godsend for our family. And I imagine a lot of other people's. In fact, if you look at this picture on the right, you can see my wife there, right at the closest to the camera, but you see 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 or 5 more people all strung out walking along the boardwalk. It was a great day. that was huge and remains. The pandemic is still going on, and you can still go walk on that and many other trails for Conservation Collier. So the campaign has started. We have a political action committee, a PAC, it's been formed. We have staff, we have a steering committee, and we're doing fundraising. By the way, did I mention we're doing fundraising? Take a note on that. We also need Audubon members, volunteers. Everybody needs to sign up for this if you can. This is something, you know, a lot of things happen that we have no control over. You know, you look at the paper, you look at, you know, your news feeds on social media, and it's depressing sometimes. You feel like you can't do anything about it. Well, folks, this is something we can do something about. And so let's look at the issue a little bit more. Here's the ballot question you're going to see on November 3rd, or if you mail in your ballot early, you're going to see it on that. And it's pretty straightforward. Do you want to tax yourself with an ad valorem tax for another 10 years? And we hope people say yes, but it's for conservation land buying, and it's got the Land Acquisition Advisory Committee overseeing it. So it's not, you know, some bureaucrats that, you know, can do whatever they want with this or divert it. They have to, you know, we've got a 9-member committee overseeing this. It's really well done, and it's well oiled and practiced. They know how to do this now. And so we have a website, yesconservationcollier.org. If you go to that website, you have an opportunity to donate, or to sign up as a volunteer, or to endorse. And if I can encourage any of you who are watching this and listening, one of the things that we really need is endorsements from all kinds of corners of our society. If you work for a business, or if you own a business, or a homeowners association, we need endorsements from those kind of groups or organizations, or you just personally, or your neighbors, your friends, your family. Get them to endorse and support, or get a resolution passed by a club that you belong to, or get them to sign an endorsement form. And it's very easy to do the endorsement. And by the way, speaking of endorsements, Audubon, with our colleagues and other conservation groups, had worked on a conservation campaign in Lee County back in 2016. And it was very successful. It was done on a shoestring, but we had tons of endorsements from all kinds of people and organizations, local governments, all the cities endorsed it. It was very impressive. And at the end of the day, in 2016, after that vote, this was Conservation 2020, they got 84% approval on that referendum. It was the highest approval percentage nationwide of any referendum, any ballot measure, 84%, more than any candidate or referendum nationwide. Conservation Collier needs to do the same. This is our opportunity to shine. And when you do that, I just want to point out, you're going to be among friends. This is, you saw the logo, by the way, Yes Conservation Collier. And if you need to move our pictures around so you can, whoops, I got ahead of myself there. Yes Conservation Collier was designed by the daughter of the chair of the campaign. Una has created this, and we really like it a lot. It's on the website. It's on a lot of these slides. So Una Watkins has been our consultant as a donation, and we love the images that it's come with that. And by the way, her mother, Ellen Getz, is chairing this campaign for the 3rd time. She did the original one in 2002. We had to do it again in 2006. That's another story. And then this year in 2020. So Ellen is a veteran and a trooper, and she's doing a bang-up job leading the charge. I will tell you though, however, if you haven't seen much about the campaign, it's because the heart of the campaign is going to come after the primary in August. So you haven't missed it yet. You know, and as you might guess, September and October are really going to be the heart of when people start paying attention to these kind of conservation and campaign messages. So we don't want to get everybody primed and then, you know, months go by and you haven't heard anything or you forget. So we're gonna really ramp this up. We're gonna have direct mail pieces. We're gonna have social media. We'll have one of the best ways, of course, is word of mouth, letters to the editor. We need people to write and let everybody know that, hey, you know, I really like this program. It's done great work. It has more work to do. Things like Horsepen Strand or Winchester Slough or McIlvain Marsh or areas right here, you know, where we live on Marco Island or City of Naples or North Naples. You know, all these places still have conservation lands and places, green spaces that we need to protect. So these are the groups that are leading this campaign: Corkscrew Swamp, Audubon, Florida, Audubon Western Everglades, which is the local chapter here, Florida Wildlife Federation, Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, that, you know, they've been advising us and have been wonderful advisors. They run campaigns like this all over the country. And by the way, they had helped us do some polling back in December. And the polling, you might not be surprised, was very positive. But you also, if you think about it, December was before the pandemic hit, or it was just hitting in the East, and nobody knew it. And so now that the pandemic has had the impacts both on health and economy that it has, it certainly gives one pause to jump into a big campaign like this for a conservation land buying program. Now, as I said, I think we have an amazing story to tell. Wherever you look at this campaign from, whether you just want to know that these preserves are out there and you never go visit them, or you walk on them every weekend, or you drink the water that comes from the recharge that these preserves enhance and clean, and the flood protection that you know, these kind of places like Pepper Ranch provide downstream. That kind of interest, we think, still is going to carry the day, even in the midst of a pandemic and the economic pain that everybody is feeling. This is something that's worth, you know, pulling out your last dime for. And we think people will do it. And indeed, we have heard through Trust for Public Land that campaigns across the country, in Ohio, and in Montana, other places in Florida, have been successful since the pandemic has started. And so that gives us encouragement and gives us hope that this too will be successful. And we want it not to just be successful. We want to send a message to everyone, land managers, to our county commission, to local governments, to the water management district, to the governor, to the president. We want everybody to know that people locally want to have control over the things that affect them. And this is one of the most important. Our water, our conservation lands, places like Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary are just vital. So I'm preaching a little sermon here, sorry. But that's what campaigning partly involves, is preaching. So if you feel a little evangelistic, you know, in coming weeks and months, please join us, because that's what's going to make this succeed. I have another point to make on conservation, and that is the issue that I don't think it's a surprising issue to anybody, but it's the issue of, to sort of paraphrase a famous quote, "No sanctuary is an island." And that's the problem we face at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. We're seeing impacts to our water levels, and it's not because of stuff that we're doing. obviously we can always do a better job of managing our resources. We can burn more, we can kill more invasive plants, exotics, like old world climbing fern and Kogan grass. These are terrible things. So we're all fighting those, but we can't do it alone. And as we have found, it's what is going on around us that is affecting Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. We have 6,000 acres of citrus that's immediately to our north. That has a lot of consequences for what happens at Corkscrew, because all that citrus basically dumps on us, and they're allowed to because it's been there a long time. We've been there a long time, but the rules weren't adequate previously, the permits. So that's obviously one of the things we want to fix, but it is what it is today, and we've got to work with our neighbors and get everybody cooperating. And it's, the citrus growers are good people. We know them. We know our neighbors, and we're trying to work with them, and they are trying with us. But we all need to pitch in. And one of the solutions to that, in addition to fixing the rules, fixing the permit systems, one of the solutions is just buying the land. It's if we don't want the citrus groves dumping on us, then maybe what we ought to do is get some of them bought and turn them into stormwater treatment areas or restored wetlands, or so that there's a filter before it comes to Corkscrew, and we have a way to control that. And that's true for other places. Like if we've got wildfire in Golden Gate Estate, wildfire risk, well, they clearly need more water in the wintertime in Golden Gate Estates. Otherwise, those fires wouldn't be so hot. They wouldn't be so dangerous. There are other factors too, like people let too much brush and wax myrtle grow up, and cabbage palms. Oh my gosh, we got cabbage palms out the wazoo everywhere. And that's the state tree. I like cabbage palms, but they're big matchsticks. That's what they are when it's too dry in the wintertime. So, anyway, you get my point. We need everybody pitching in on this. if you're a volunteer at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, I know you do hard work, and your heart is in this. Your labor is appreciated, but we can't do it alone. We've got to reach out beyond the borders of the sanctuary. So that's my probably my most preachy message, but I think you all understand the principle of that and the concept of that. So let's get our plans together. Go to that website. Yes, conservationcollier.org. Sign up, endorse, donate, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. This is something we can actually do and accomplish ourselves. So I'd be happy to hear some questions or suggestions or comments, and now it's time to do that. And I think you're supposed to do that via the chat. So Sally, if you've got any comments, I'd love to hear.
Yes, Brad. We've had quite a few comments and questions. So I'm gonna, and some people might add more while we're talking, but we'll go ahead and try to answer all the ones that we've gotten so far. So the first couple of questions were about with the loss of grasslands and herbaceous wetlands and the shrubs, which plants are specifically categorized as woody shrubs? And can you explain what the difference is as far as water loss, if it's dominated by woody shrubs or herbaceous vegetation?
So this is another lunch and learn that Sean Clem is going to do, I'm sure, sometime in the coming months and weeks. But because that's a very technical question that I don't know the specific answer to. If the question is how much ET, how much water loss are we pumping through woody shrubs into the atmosphere from the groundwater? I don't know the answer to that, but I can answer some of that. We're talking about Carolina willow, which is a deep-rooted woody small tree, shrubby tree that comes into marshes and invades marshes especially when the hydrology has been altered. and we haven't had enough fire. When there's not enough fire, the willow comes in. And if you've ever stood on the platform overlooking the Central Marsh, you can see a lot of Carolina willow, coastal plain willow, all over the place in there in that marsh. That marsh should be alligator flag. It should be, you know, all kinds of shallow rooted seasonal plants that die back in the wintertime when it gets dry, and then when it starts raining again, they grow again, and that cycle. And in the winter, it burns, and that's what it should look like. And it's a low level, grassy, you know, kind of marsh. But when the marsh gets woody vegetation like willow or wax myrtle or other things that are deep rooted and perennial and longer lasting, then it goes deeper into the water table, even in the dry season. When you don't see any water on the surface, those woody plants are reaching down into the water table, sucking the water out and transpiring it through their leaves into the atmosphere. And I would never have thought that that made that much of a difference. But Sean and Mike have told us that it does make a difference, especially when you have hundreds or thousands of acres of those kind of plants. Now you're talking a lot of water. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. And we'll look forward to a presentation from Sean with more details.
Good. Me too.
So we've had some other questions. One of them had to do with phosphorus fertilizer. And some states have banned phosphorus fertilizer in their states. Do you know of any plans or talk about banning phosphorus fertilizer or limiting its use for certain times of the year in Florida?
So the fertilizer issue for urban areas, which is what the question is kind of geared towards, is important. And there's some debate about the nature and the features of those fertilizer ordinances. So the city of Naples, city of Marco Island, Collier County, Sanibel, lots of places have fertilizer ordinances, and they're really important. And they govern things like the amount of phosphorus or nitrogen, and many of them require soil tests to even use fertilizers. And I think it is true that phosphorus is banned and only can be used if your soil tests show that you are deficient in that. It may be the other way around. Maybe it's nitrogen. I'm sorry that I don't know the answer to that. But the other big issue is whether there should be a summer blackout when the rainy season is on. When the wet season is here, should we allow people to fertilize their grass? And there is a debate, and there are very, very smart people on both sides of that debate. Audubon's contention is that the blackout periods in the rainy season are important, and they do have good effects, and there are data to show that. However, let me make this point, and I think everybody agrees with this. Grass is really the big problem here. If you don't have grass, then you don't need to fertilize the grass. So get rid of your lawn and put in native plants. You know, they're beautiful. You know, you can have trees and wildflowers. You know, there's the salvia and the tick seed and all kinds of beautiful stuff. Muley grass with the beautiful, you know, pink and red flowers in the fall and late summer. Man, who needs grass unless it's muley grass? So anyway, that's my answer.
That's right. Okay, Brad, we had another question about the easement purchases for land, for Conservation Collier and other purchases for land. Are they trying to buy places that are current wetlands or areas that are more like farmlands that they may convert to wetlands in the future?
So if you're talking about Conservation Collier does not buy easements. They have been buying land fee simple for the main reason that they want to provide access to as much of it as possible. So like the picture you see there, that's the Gordon River Greenway. And if you don't own it, very few private landowners want the public coming on their private lands. So even if they've sold an easement. So that's the reason for fee simple. Now, other programs like the Farm Bill programs through USDA Florida Forever buys lots of easements. Rural and Family Lands Protection Program is another state easement program they buy from private landowners, farmers and ranchers mainly. So those are really valuable and allow a lot of conservation to happen, even though there's not public access.
Another question was if Lee County has any program similar to Collier County on land acquisition that might show up on the ballot this year.
No, as I mentioned earlier in the program, in 2016, Lee County's program is called Conservation 2020. And it was started in 1996. That was their first referendum. And it was reauthorized by referendum in 2016. That was the ballot measure that a whole bunch of us helped get passed with 84% of Lee County voters approving it. So Conservation 2020 has bought over 30,000 acres of conservation land, including in, you know, the Horsepen Strand, the Crew Project, beaches, all over the place. So it's an important local conservation program that's been really tremendous.
Okay. All right, cool. Another question, this might take a little while, but can you briefly explain rural land stewardship?
So rural land stewardship is not a land buying program. It complements the Conservation Collier and Florida Forever and other land buying programs by using growth management policies that are in the form of incentives to farmers and ranchers out east. It came about as a result of litigation that Audubon Western Everglades and Florida Wildlife Federation brought against the county back in 97, and won. And so as a result of that, the state required Collier County to do a better job of protecting 300,000 acres of rural lands, including the area around Immokalee and the Panther Refuge. And that eventually ended up being the Rural Land Stewardship Program and the Rural Fringe Mixed Use District, two different programs. They're incentive-based. They transfer development rights from important conservation and wetland lands like Okalawakuchi Slough or Camp Key Strand, or around the Panther Refuge, red cockaded woodpecker habitat, wood stork habitat, transfer the development rights to places that are already impacted and let villages and towns be built in those places. And so that's the principle. It's an incentive program. That also deserves a whole lunch and learn at a separate time if you want to know more about it. But Audubon is a supporter and participant in that, and also working on improvements to that you'll see in this coming fall.
Cool, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and we have, well, some questions about is there a 2020 map of wetland loss in our area? The one that you showed was in 2004, which was terrible, but yep. Is there a more current map?
I don't have a map. We're working on updating the map that you saw. So we've gone to, I personally, I'm a lobbyist. So, you know, I'm the person who knows the least, and they let me go talk to the county commissioners. You know, all the science people and the GIS people, they all have the knowledge. I'm just here, you know, I say what they tell me to say. And what I'm telling you now is that we don't have that map, but we're working on it. But I will tell you that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has a tool with which they measured coastal wetland losses between 1996 and 2010. In that time period, in Lee and Collier County, we lost over, let's see, it was 27,000 acres of wetlands from 1996 to 2010. So if you're shocked at that, as I am, that is motivation to fix the rules that let that happen. And obviously the other thing to fix is let's get buy as much of that as we can with the money that we've got through Conservation Collier, Florida Forever, whatever. But we also have to fix the wetland permitting rules that are allowing those kind of losses. 27,000 acres since 1996, probably more than 30,000 today. Okay. So that's the end of that answer.
All right, we have time for just one last question, and we'll take that question from Sean Clem, who wrote, Brad, in your opinion, what is the biggest threat facing Collier County in the next 20 years?
So I would say the biggest threat is it's a interrelated threat. It's the threat of poorly planned development and lack of restoration and protection of our watersheds. So as I said at the beginning of this program, the main feature of South Florida, and indeed the Corkscrew Swamp and Collier County area, Southwest Florida, is water. You know, we were well over 3/4 wetlands before development came to Southwest Florida. That's a lot of wetlands and a lot of water. And trying to push back against that, working against Mother Nature is a fool's errand. We need to figure out how to build our communities in the right place sustainably so that we can protect and restore the watersheds that we depend on for water, flood protection, and cleansing of that water. That's the 1-2 punch that we're just not quite achieving right now. You know, sustainable development in the right place with protection and restoration of the watersheds. So we're trying. That's what Everglades restoration is about. That's what Conservation Collier is about. That's what rural land stewardship is supposed to be about, and planning, but we haven't arrived yet. So that's our big challenge. Oh, and did anybody say anything about climate change and sea level rise? Holy crap, if that doesn't up the ante, you know, I don't know what does. So there's a long-winded answer to that.
Well, thank you, Brad, very much. And for everyone still listening, a recording of this will be available on our website. So you can direct people there if they miss the presentation today. And with that, we're out of time, but I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And thank you again, Brad.
Thank you, it was fun.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.